Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar brought to you by Codefresh Live. Today, we are presenting Simplify Your Code with Helmfile. Our presenter is Branden Wright, Staff Cloud Architect for RootLevel Technology, and he'll be joined later on by Kostas Kapolonis, DevOps Evangelist for Codefresh during the Q&A. Today, Branden will go over some of the common problems you can solve with Helmfile and how you can use it to simplify your code and Codefresh pipelines. But first, before we get started, a couple housekeeping notes. We encourage your questions throughout the session. Just please remember to submit them using the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar rather than in the chat so we can keep track of them. We will type some answers in the Q&A tool and we will reserve most for the discussion at the end of the webinar. This session is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you by tomorrow. And that'll be from me, so look out for an email from Taryn Jones at Codefresh. Lastly, please remember to reference codefresh.io/events for upcoming webinars as we have fresh and informative webinars for you several times a month. So with that, I will hand it over to Branden to kick off the presentation. Hey, Branden.
Hey, thanks a lot, Taryn. My name's Branden Wright. I'm a staff cloud architect at RootLevel. So I've been using Kubernetes for 3 to 4 years now, and seeing all different types of installs. Currently, I work for RootLevel Technology. We're a consulting cloud strategy partner. So seeing a lot of different types of installs, migrations from data centers to AWS, migrations from one cloud to another. Primarily with my focus around Kubernetes. So today we're going to be talking about Helmfile, and we'll be talking specifically about Helm, Codefresh, and Kubernetes. So those are things that at this point we expect everyone to know, and at least a basic of what they are. You don't have to have too much detail on how to use them, but having a basic knowledge of them is good at this point. So if you don't have that, you might want to go look up some other basic webinars on those and then come back to this at a later time. All right, so what are we going to talk about specifically today? So essentially, we're going to be going over some common problems that you might come across when using Helm and a tool like Codefresh for deployments. And so the idea is to look at some of the patterns and some of the things that they do to help solve those issues. We'll be going through a case study to do that. So specifically, like why Helmfile? Like Helm is great. It's actually one of the things I really like about Kubernetes is the fact that I can take this Helm chart that someone else has written and reuse it. It's kind of one of those things that config management promised but was never really able to deliver on. But as you're writing your Helm charts and going through setting up multiple environments and getting secrets set up and those things, you start to notice that there's a lot of problems that aren't easy to solve. So like some of the common things that you might come across would be like, if I could use an environment variable, that would be great. Or like secrets are great, but setting them up is kind of a pain. So we'll talk about those things and a lot of other things that Helmfile can help address. So specifically, what is Helmfile? It's just a tool that runs and manages Helm for you. So you can think of it as just a wrapper on top of Helm. There isn't any vendor lock-in because it's actually just running Helm. So if you want to get rid of Helmfile, you can just run Helm ls and you'll be able to see all of your Helm installs that were done by Helmfile. And then specifically, it's giving you Golang templating without any restrictions. So in Kubernetes, they do give you access to Golang templating, but there's a lot of things that they restrict you from being able to do. So things like running a script is hard. Things like using an environment variable you can't do. You can't use templating inside your values YAML files, things of that nature. So specifically, here's kind of what a Helmfile would look like. At the top here, you can see in a simple form, you'll define some repositories. In this case, we're just defining the stable repository. And then you can define some releases. In this case, we're defining 2 releases. The release at the top is just an application that we've written. I actually just ran Helm create and used what it generates, which is an Nginx hello world chart. So in this case, you have a few options. You can install from local disk, like in the top release, you can see that says chart, and we're using a local path to go up a couple directories and then find the application on disk. Or if you look at the DNS chart, it's actually using the stable repository that was set up at the top of the Helm file. So you've got a lot of control there. Further, you can kind of see at the bottom, you can specify values files, and that those can actually have templating. And you can start to do things like control which version of your releases, and there's a lot more as well. But essentially, it's a YAML file to hold metadata about more than just your Helm chart. So today, basically, we're going to be doing some walkthroughs, and essentially what we'll do is we'll be looking at the idea of having this first application, this Nginx chart called My App, which we want to deploy, and basically getting it deployed into into a dev environment, and then basically seeing some of the problems that might come up in some ways that Helmfile can help with that. So we're going to be starting with a GKE cluster that has nothing installed on it. Okay, there's a little lie. I did run some of the deploys to make sure that they'd be up in a timely fashion, but I did start from a clean cluster. And then we'll also had to set up some GCP credentials for things like Let's Encrypt DNS, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And our specific example, I used a mono repo, so everything's kept in one repository, but there is a lot of flexibility, and you definitely can support like having a Git repo per chart if you wanted more of an approach like that. So one of the first things you may come across when dealing with moving from Helm 2 to Helm 3 is that with Helm 2, the actual repositories, it would set up stable for you. So you could just install from the stable directory, and yeah, it would just work. Since moving to Helm 3, they don't set them up for you anymore, probably partially because they are deprecating the public Helm charts repo at some point. So I think they're trying to get people to move away from that. So one of the common things that, come across might be you had directions written out and everything was working great in Helm 2, but now you have a new employee and you've kind of upgraded to Helm 3, and the docs don't have anything about setting up the stable repo because when the docs were written, it wasn't needed. So one of the nice things is that we can just, in our Helms file YAML, put a repository, and we can put the stable repository, we can put custom repositories that are either private to us, or we can also do like public repositories, maybe something like JetStack. So basically all of them can kind of get defined here. So then what happens in this case is when we run Helmfile apply, it'll actually add the repository for us. And then you can see it actually updates that repository as well. So then when it does the Helm install, we're not going to get an error. Everything's going to work as expected. So one of the other things that just worked in Helm 2 but no longer works in Helm 3 would be if you try to install and the namespace doesn't exist. So in Helm 2, your chart would just create the namespace and then install into it, and everything would work great. In Helm 3, they kind of got rid of that, I guess, to match the other patterns that they have other places in Kubernetes. And so now it's something where you have to make sure you set that up beforehand, but it might be something that you forget. So Helm gives you the ability to use hooks, and they basically have the 4 hooks listed there. The ones that I've used the most have been prepare and clean up. And so you can start to address different problems with this. Like one thing you might be able to do is like maybe you want to run Terraform to actually create your GKE cluster before you run an install. Or in our case, like maybe you want to write a script that will go ahead and create a namespace if it doesn't exist currently. So let's see here. So as you can see, it's pretty easy. There's just a hooks tab you can do, and then the event, and you can just pick a few options here. In this case, we created a script called create namespace, and then we're just passing it an argument dev, saying that we want to create namespaces for dev. The chart that we wrote will go ahead and it'll create a dev system and a dev services namespace based off of that argument. So here you can see that it went ahead and built, and here's the logs where you can see that the actual namespace dev was missing, and so it went ahead and created the dev namespace, and then it actually started the deploy of the chart. One of the big things that you kind of come across as you start to use Helm is it's a black box as far as to what's going to happen. So you can run Helm install, and it'll do the applying of the different Kubernetes resources. And Kubernetes promises you that eventually it's going to get to match what you put in your YAML. It's declarative in that way. So one thing you can kind of notice as you start working with other people, or as you like put this into a CI/CD system, you want to know what it's actually going to change. So this was something that is in tools like Terraform, and they had dry runs and config management tools, but there's just nothing built in for Helm specifically. So there's actually a Helm plugin out there called diff, and essentially this takes care of exactly what we want here. Like in this case, you can see that the person was going to deploy, but they were on an older version of the chart. So it was actually going to go back to my app 0.1.0. And if you look down at the bottom there, the image, it was actually a broken image before, and we've since fixed that in the update. So if the person were to roll this out, then they would break the application and things wouldn't work. So it's good to know what you're going to change, and if you put in a CI/CD system, then you actually have some history and some way to go back and look at that as well. One thing to note would be that it doesn't work with a three-way diff currently, which Helm 3 started supporting. So specifically kind of what that is Helm 2 didn't support this, but in Helm 3, there's the idea that if you were to do a Helm release and then go do a kubectl edit and actually edit the deployment, and then try to do another Helm apply or Helm install, it didn't see the manual changes and didn't know that you basically needed to redeploy to change things or overwrite those manual changes. So the three-way diff has to deal with those manual changes. If everything's done in Kubernetes, then you will see the diff. And hopefully that bug will be something that's fixed here in the near future. So one of the big things that we'll come across is secrets. Secrets are awesome once they're created. You can just consume them and your application starts to work. But there's this initial idea of like, how do you create the secrets? After you create the secrets, where do you store that sensitive data if you need to get to it? So if I need to read that password, or if I need to set up that same secret locally to run Helm, like how do I do that? And then also, how do you like pass that around and share it? So if I like apply something with a secret and then you want to spin up a new environment, like how do you apply that secret as well? So Helm Secrets is another plugin that is used to address this problem. And so kind of to take a little bit of a step back, if you weren't using Helm Secrets, you would have the option of, in Codefresh, they let you encrypt variables. So you can go ahead and you can see there the Helmfile secret cert or the GCP credentials. Both have a lock on the right there where you cannot reverse that, so you're not going to be able to get that data back, but they expose it as an environment variable inside Codefresh to you. So you can then use those variables as secrets. Like, so maybe you set up environment variables like this and then run some kubectl commands to create your secrets. Or maybe you set up environment variables and then use Terraform to create your secrets. So there's a few different ways to approach it. But as I was saying, the one thing that gets a little bit hard is like, where do you actually save that info then if you want to be able to get back to it? And like, how does somebody else use that? And so it just becomes a management and a sharing issue. So with Helm Secret, what they do is they actually give you access to values files, like you can see on the right here, where you can see the keys, secret files, and then the top level is the next key to really care about is gcloudcredentials.json. And so with the credentials.json, you can see here that it's encrypted. And if we look specifically, it was encrypted with PGP, and they've got a little detail about that. So the idea is that you can actually write these values in clear text, something like this, and then basically Helm Secret will encrypt it with the style you've told it. I used PGP or GPG keys. Some of the other things you have access to would be things like AWS's KMS or GCP's KMS. So you can use all different types of authentication. It's so in this case, you basically have your credential now and the value. It's encrypted and saved to disk, and anyone who's loaded that PGP key can then decrypt it. So it makes it really easy to pass around not just this one secret, but numerous. And then here's how you would actually use this value to create a secret. So this was taken from the public traffic chart, and a lot of charts are doing similar things where they've got an actual secret resource that you're creating. So the actual secret resource, if you look here on line 13, is going to loop over what's under secret files, and then it's going to have a file name and a content. So in this case, we're going to create a secret where the file name's gcloudcredentials.json, and then it actually has the content. So this resource on the right has to be in the public Kubernetes chart or in your own Kubernetes chart somewhere. If this isn't, this is how the actual secret gets created. So if this were missing, things don't fall in place properly. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of charts. It is a common practice to kind of have this available. And so if it's not, I'm sure they'd accept pull requests. So a little more detail about Helm Secrets is it's written on top of SOPs. There's a handful of links out there, and there's actually a Medium article too about going through SOPs and Helm Secrets specifically, but it's basically a framework that lets you specify multiple types of encryption. It's pretty granular. You can specify fallback keys. You can do different encryptions based on like the directory or the path. So like, you know, maybe I shouldn't have the ability to decrypt some secrets, but Taran should, then we should be able to set that up so it would work appropriately. And best of all, like we said, then it can just get committed to Git, and you can just run your Helm apply command just like anything else. And they've got tools built in where it automatically decrypts it, and you've got command line tools to edit the secrets files so that you can add to them and things of that nature. One of the next things that Helm does really well is you can actually have ordered dependencies. One problem with like Helm dependencies is that if I have a Helm chart and it's my application and I depend on a database, for instance, MySQL, then if I have it so that it can all be installed in one Helm install command, it actually installs both those things inside the same release. So for some things that's fine, but some of the time it's better to have more separation there and be able to control, like I want to deploy one part of the stack, but not the other. In the Terraform world, again, I kind of think of targeting. So in this case with Helm, it's nice that you can actually have Helmfile set up to install your whole stack with one command, but then add labels that you can use the labels to specify just partial deployments. So if I just wanted to install the SQL server, but not my application, I could do a Helm file, apply, and then specify the label for MySQL. So there's a few different ways to declare dependencies. You can do it by actually depending on another Helm file, or they've got the ability to have needs inside a single Helm file. So for this demo, I used actual different Helm files and would depend on those, which we can take a look at here in just a minute. So the example I put together is going to install what's shown here. Ultimately, we're going to have an Nginx My World application, which we can hit with a DNS entry. Traffic is going to be used for ingress into the Kubernetes cluster. External DNS is used to sync DNS records where needed. And then the first one is namespace. So we want these to actually install in the reverse order. So in the order that they're numbered, we want namespaces to be installed first. Once we have namespaces installed, we can install external DNS. The idea of external DNS is that it looks at ingresses for host names and basically takes those, and then we've set up Google credentials via a secret, and it publishes IP addresses and fully qualified domain names to the Google Cloud DNS. Traffic is a reverse proxy. It's written in Golang. It's kind of similar to HA proxy, but like a newer version. It's written for the cloud, so it's API driven. And as I mentioned, it's written in Golang, and it's a pretty powerful little reverse proxy. It's got a lot of features in there. I normally recommend it in cases where people want more features than maybe Nginx can offer, but aren't ready to go to something like Istio. It really feels like it was purpose built for this type of a situation. So we'll use that for our ingress. And then Nginx, as I said, is just there to kind of throw up a hello world page. So in the demo that we're going to look at, we're going to go ahead and deploy my app, ingress, DNS, and a namespace. We're going to use the secret CML like we talked about. And in this case, there's an actual CF step Helm file that Codefresh published. So I was able to start with that, but we'll take a look at some customization we did to get it to work for the exact situations that we're setting up. So as far as the demo goes, I'll go ahead and show you this first. So if we want to take a look, this is what we're trying to deploy or set up. It's going to clone the repository. We're going to do a dry run of the Helm apply to show us what it wants to change, and then it'll need an approval before it goes forward and deploys. So if we want to go back here, we could take a look a little bit at this file. So the clone step, we don't really need to look at too much. It's actually generated if you just create a new pipeline by Codefresh. So just kind of used what they gave me. And then for the dry run, we can take a look at a few things here. So you can see that I actually published my own image in this case. So basically all I did was I was able to clone Codefresh's CF Helm step, and then I just needed to make a few minor changes. So the two changes I needed to make was on line 14 there, I needed to install a package so that PGP will work. And then down here, we had to, on line 23, we had to go ahead and install gcloud, and that's used because I run some kubectl commands. Those were actually the only two changes needed, though everything else just fell in place and worked. One of the nice things is that Codefresh had already put together a Python script to kind of take environment variables that were set in process. So all of that was able to just stay and fall in line nicely. So if we look here specifically at the Codefresh step, the few things that we're doing is kind of what I just mentioned. So the first thing is we're taking this secret that we set up in Helmfile, which is the PGP key. So basically, we're just going to base64 decode that value and shove it into a variable called private RSA. So we're base64 decoding it because I base64 encoded it so that I could shove a lot of information just on a single line. I did the same thing with the Google credentials. So you can see the next line, we're doing the same thing with the Google credentials. So then we're going ahead and activating our gcloud install to use that credentials file. And we're setting our kubectl context. The kube context is actually tied to Codefresh's integration, and it's just the Kubernetes install. So if I click over on my Kubernetes clusters here, it's just the name right here, Helmfile demo. So once that's done, we're going to import the PGP key that we sent and then change directories so that I'm going to where my code exists and just run Helmfile. So in this one, you'll see that we're setting an environment variable for the command to be diff. The only difference when we're actually doing the deploy is that the command is set to be apply instead of diff. And then the actual permission step is pretty straightforward. This is the approval step. And basically, if you come down here, there's a when that basically says that if it's approved, we'll move forward. So let's go ahead and look at a little bit of the code that we've put together for this. So So the first code that we had put together was actually for the creating of a namespace. So I kind of showed this in the slides, but didn't actually run the demo. But you can kind of see here, like we talked about, it's just a script. And then the script that I had was pretty straightforward. We were just getting a namespace, looking at the exit code, and then using that to decide if we should create a namespace or not. So for this, we're going to go ahead and look at what we were just writing out with the numerous charts and dependencies. So we can see here at the top of our code2 directory, we've got this sops file, and all we're doing here is specifying a PGP key, and this key is going to be used for everything because there's just the one rule. There isn't any more detail in there. So then the next thing might be to look at some of these Helm files. So essentially, we've got traffic for ingress, we've got our application. And so if we start by looking at our application at the top, we have a Helm file. And so you can see that this is going to depend on another Helm file. So the first thing it's going to do is come across this, and then it's going to see line 2 there, and it's going to go try to run traffic's Helm file. So when we go look at traffic's Helm file, the second line is to run DNS's Helm file. So then it'll go run DNS's Helm file. We look at that, it's going to run the namespace Helm file. So essentially we get all the way here, and this has repositories in the dev environment and the namespace release. It's using a local chart that's up a few directories and then going to create these 2 namespaces. So after this runs, then we're going to get back to more line 4 here, and DNS is going to run and install, and then traffic will finish installing, and then my app. So one of the other things to kind of look at here is the way I set this up. I set it up for a single environment, and then the idea being as a next step, we'll set up more environments. And so basically in this Helm directory, there's the charts directory, which has the 2 custom charts we're using, my app and namespace. We've got environments, which we hold environment level values. So in this case, we can see that we're specifying a domain name, Google project, and then we're using the environment to just set that as a value, so we can set labels and some things of that nature. So let's see. So then if we want to look at the values YAML, we can see I'm doing some conditionals based on if there is a domain or not. So essentially, if there is a domain, then I want to go ahead and set up ingress. And the ingress is going to go to um, the specific traffic I'm trying to set up, which will be for a dev environment, dev-traffic public. And it's going to set up the appropriate domain name. And if the domain's not set, then ingress just isn't going to be set up. So for this environment, though, as we looked, we are setting a domain. So everything should hopefully run and fall in place. So let's go take a look here. So what we can do in this one is we just need to run this for the most part. So if we look over at the right here, we're going to set it up for the dev environment. It's going to deploy the service my app, and it's going to use the directory of code 2. So that should all be good. So we can just go ahead and click run, and we can run it off the master branch, and it's going to start to deploy. So this is the part where I kind of cheated a little bit so that we could just make sure all this stuff was set up and ready to go already. So if we go back here and look at this run that I've already done, here's the dry run, and I'll scroll to the top. So you can see that the first thing that sees in Helm diff is the namespace. It's going to create two namespaces, dev system and dev services. Then after that, we're going to look at DNS and create the DNS chart that we talked about to sync that fully qualified domain name of the ingress. And then if we scroll down a little bit further, you can see it's telling you details about what resources it's updating. I'm just scrolling through a little bit here because of our amount of time. So here's traffic getting set up. So we should have traffic all configured. And let's see. And then lastly is the my application. You can see from looking at my application that it did set up the ingress with the domain name that we gave it. So we should be able to just check this out and go. All right, well, let me try it in an incognito window real quick. That one's being weird. All right, so yeah, as you can see, we can now get to our page. We do have a certificate here. It's just not being seen as valid, which is a little bit weird. Normally with Let's Encrypt, it would see that as valid. So I'm not sure what happened with that process. I would have to take a look. And then for traffic specifically, we were setting up so here we can see now the dashboard. We've got basically two ingresses, one for the front end, and then which is my app, and then one for traffic, which we just hit now. So specifically, what ended up happening there was we only had to do a Helmfile apply in the my app directory because all the dependencies were set, so it deployed our entire stack for us. That's really nice if you're trying to test or maybe set up something in a CI/CD system. Just having that ability versus, yeah, having to install, each piece of the stack or know that you have to call 3 pipelines in the right order or script things out, things like that. So let's go ahead and go back to the slides here. Present. All right, so one of the really cool things you can start to do with Helmfile is templating your values file. So, I mean, this is very simple in what it sounds like, but it's super powerful. So you could see there, I was templating by using values files to set up an ingress or not set up an ingress. So all of a sudden, if you want to try to install something but don't have a domain set up, you can kind of do that and you would just port forward to the pod. Another thing you can do is you can start to use environment variables. So you can say like maybe Codefresh in an earlier pipeline ran Terraform, and then Codefresh has the ability to set environment variables that'll stay between steps. So you could then leverage that in your Helm chart and basically maybe, create a DNS domain and then pass in that domain name via an environment variable, for instance. You can do things like render out other files. So the top section that kind of repeats, I could kind of put that into a common file and just reference it versus actually typing that out numerous times. You can run the scripts and get details back from scripts. So maybe you have a database where you store some information that you want to use. So it really does get super powerful though. So the next thing that we're going to look at here is the idea that we set up our dev stack, which is specified at the top. And essentially, we just want to set up a new environment, but we don't have DNS set up for it. I just want to be able to test something that I'm writing right now. So what I did in this case was we used the templating to create a script that can use XIPO. So xip.io is essentially free DNS for you. If you add an IP address in front of that, it'll just route to the IP automatically for you. So we can kind of take a look at a little bit of what I set up here for this one. All right, so if we go ahead and look at the my app Helm file to start with, oops. Sorry, here we go. So essentially what we have, oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong directory. I'm supposed to be in code 03. That's why it looked weird. Okay, so if I go over here and I look at the my app directory, then what we can do is rather than actually specifying an environment here, I can use the tag so that whatever environment I'm running, it'll use. And then you can start to use variables and conditionals. So in this case, I said if the environment's dev, then use the dev specific file that I set up that we looked at, which had the domain name called out, which is this one. And then if we're not, what we're going to do is we're going to run a script called getDomain.sh, and then we're going to load the default values YAML. So the default just has the environment and project still. And then if we want to go ahead and look at this script for getDomainName, it's going to go ahead and run kubectl, and it's going to look for a service in the system's namespace for the traffic public ingress that's been set up, and it's going to output the IP address from the load balancer. So then it goes ahead, and if it was able to do that successfully, it adds XIPO to the end of it. If it wasn't, it's just going to return a blank string. So the idea is that the first time that this runs, the service for the ingress for traffic has not been set up, so it will not be able to get it. But when you run on the second time, it should be able to get that IP address and then use that IP address to set up all your routing and things of that nature. So we go ahead and look at our Codefresh runs. I previously ran this so that we didn't have issues, which considering GitHub's had some issues polling and stuff is probably a good thing. So here's the first one. So if we look at it, you can see that we're doing a diff and there's an install. And so basically, yeah. completes the install. And then the second time we run this, we should be able to see where it specifies the ingress and where that shows up. So if we go ahead, and go to the pipeline, which was the next run I did right after that one, and I scroll up, you can see that there's a lot less output here. So these top charts are barely changing at all. Some of them aren't. So if I scroll down here, we can see I'm turning on SSL for traffic for the ingress. We were setting up an SSL cert for that XIPO address here. And we're going to use HTTPS now. And then let's see. Here's where the Google project is getting set up for the DNS configuration. And then if we look down all the way here, you can see that the ingress is getting set up for traffic public at that XIPO address. You can see if that's up as we'd expect. And it looks like it is. And then the other thing we can look at is, here's the ingress for my app. And we can see that that's hopefully up as well. Yep. And then so at this point, we could essentially just run a pipeline for anything we wanted. And as long as you run it twice, you would at least have DNS accessible. So in this specific pipeline, if I were to run it, we could override a few of the build variables. Like maybe we want to build something called my test environment. So MTE, and then this code is actually in code 3. I use the same pipeline for both directories of. So, and then we can just run, and yeah, it should do its thing. And at the end, we would again just have another environment here. So let's see. So as you can see, I'm just going to fly through this, but we set up multiple environments in the same cluster. You can also set up multiple environments in like different clusters. You can specify the kube context that it's going to run in. And the fact that they have the templating makes it really powerful to set up like ad hoc environments. So they've got other features too. We mentioned you can do a repo per chart. And also, they've got different modules to go from. Some people do like a top level Helm file to deploy everything and then just have the individual Helm files not have dependencies. So there's a lot of different ways you can skin a cat. So yeah, we decided to go with a mono repo. You can go with the per chart and grab things from different places like GCS and GitHub and things like that for your Helm file. So I would say the big thing is just as you're getting out there, like don't try to recreate something yourself if you're running into a problem that you think everyone else is having. So, there's Helm plugins to look at, which work really good. Just looking for tools in general for the problem that you're trying to solve. Helmsman is a tool that's kind of a competitor to Helmfile, but also solves things in a different manner. So Customize is a tool that's pretty popular out there. You can use Helmfile with or without it. But yeah, just check out the ecosystem. And along those lines, some of the tools that I've come across while using that are common would be like Reloader is a nice one that if you want to reload a pod after you change a secret or a config map, it can take care of that. External DNS, which we talked about, things like Cert Manager for managing SSL certs and Valero for backup. So there's lots of tools out there and people are trying to solve the same problems as you are. So overall, this was just meant to be a case study to start to show you some of the things that Helmfile can do and some of the problems it can take care of. Personally, I liked it because of the Golang templating and how much power you have with that. So that was the reason I decided to look at Helmfile over some of the other tools like Helmsman, for instance. But really just try it out, look what's out there. And yeah, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that it's a simple tool that can give you a lot of power. And so I think it's time for questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Branden, for that great presentation and demo. Reminder to everyone to enter any questions that you have in the Q&A icon on your Zoom toolbar, and then we'll get them answered. So our first question is, can Helmfile deploy from customized templates instead of Helm templates?
Yeah, it can. If you're using customize, you can both use like customize with Helm and without. I haven't used customize too much, so don't know all the details about it, but yes, it definitely can.
All right, thank you. And then I just want to clarify in the chat, I see they're just asking if the presentation deck will be available. I know there are a lot of great links in this deck. Yes, absolutely. I will send the recording and the deck to you by tomorrow at the latest, and that'll be from Taryn at codefresh.io, so look out for that. So our next question is the demo app for this presentation available on GitHub?
Yeah, so the demo is out there. There's a few things that aren't covered in the demo, like the GCP setup of the credentials or the Codefresh, like I went through the UI to do some integration, so it shows there. So those pieces aren't covered, but all of the actual things you need for this are in there. And I'd be more than happy to help out with those other things if somebody posted an issue on the GitHub or emailed me or reached out in any way. So yeah, it should all be there for you to use.
Excellent, thank you. And just a reminder to, if anyone has any other questions, please enter them into the Q&A. And while I wait for those, I'm just going to launch a poll real quickly. We really appreciate your feedback. Let us know if you want Codefresh or RootLevel Technology to reach out to you and provide some more information. And I also have Kostas on the line, who's our Chief Technology Evangelist for Codefresh. Kostas, did you have any questions?
I think it's also important to mention some of the differences between Helmfile and Helmsman, because people will want to know about this.
Yeah, so for that, I think what we'll probably do is we'll probably just do a separate webinar to go into like the nitty gritty and get into more details on it. But at a high level, both of them were trying to solve the problem of multiple Helm releases and multiple Helm deploys, and how do you deal with Tiller and a fresh cluster. So, but Helmsman took an approach of using TOML files. So they've got a few cool features, like you can upgrade your releases. So if you have like an environment and want to push it from dev to prod, they've got like things written up, a strategy to deal with that. But to really kind of get in and do a good comparison, I think would probably take a little more time.
I have another question from Michael. Being that Helm 3 deprecated the CRD install hook, can Helmfile help with installing operators?
Yeah, so I'm sure it could, because the hooks how you can tie in and everything, but Helm 3 does have a way to deal with that. They just want you to put those into specific directories so that they get applied first. So I would say that I'd probably just look to do it the native Helm way, but yeah, if you ran into an issue there, you could probably use it to figure out a workaround.
Sounds good. And looks like that's all of our questions for now. Kostas or Branden, did you have any final comments or topics that you wanted to bring up before we close out?
No, not specifically. Just everyone in the Kubernetes environment is awesome and doing a great job. So like I said, look what's out there and leverage the tools. I don't know, personally, I feel like it's an anti-pattern to try to customize things on your own too much.
Sounds good. So on that note, feel free and reach out to RootLevel Technology or to Codefresh. Check out codefresh.io/events for our upcoming webinars, as we might have a follow-up webinar to this one coming at you soon. And thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it. And we will see you next time on Codefresh Live. Thank you, Branden. Thank you, Kostas, and for everyone for joining. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
you.